Today I'm joined by Tariq, and we are going to be talking about the new Rosetta Heroes in Classic Constructed, specifically the Rune Blades. Got kind of someone a little well known for playing some Elemental Rune Blade in the past. Figured you might have an opinion or two on the heroes. Why don't you introduce yourself to anyone that doesn't know who you are?
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Tariq Patel. I have a number of achievements through the game. I've won two nationals. I have several top eight callings, and most recently topped a pro tour. So I've topped at some of the highest levels of the game in Flesh and Blood, and a lot of them have been with one of my favorite or archetypes, which is Runeblade. So I'm excited to talk to everybody today about the Runeblade archetype.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that first nationals? What you played at that one?
Yeah, so I ended up playing Lightning Briar, which was at the time a new take on a classic archetype, which was Runeblade. But what the difference was is I didn't play any blues, and the idea was to maximize the point value of every card in your hand, where you would get a minimum of 3 points of value, with ideally, hopefully, 4 points of value on some of the bigger attacks with Go again, such as Ravenous Rebel.
Yeah, that was like a really novel approach to deck building at the time. No one was really looking at their decks at the time like that, and it really set that on the map of like set you on the map, and it set how to deck build on the map in that way now. So let's just jump into the heroes. If you are here for one specific hero, there's going to be timestamps below, so you can jump forward to one if you aren't interested in one of them. Let's start off with the Earth hero Florian. We have your Florian deck here. So real briefly, what are you looking to do with this deck? Why should someone play this hero?
Yeah, so Florian's a very interesting approach to the Runeblade archetype. Classically, we saw Runeblades be very aggressively slanted, going back to, I guess, the first Runeblade, which was Viserai, and then subsequently Chain. Both those decks were functionally aggro decks in a large way. They were looking to block with maybe one card maximum and then go wide. With Viserai, you would play a Mauvrin Skies, follow it up with a powerful 2-drop attack into a Rosetta Thorn, trying to present 11 to 12 damage off of 3 cards and block with 3.
Mm-hmm.
We're, the classical hero of, banish your entire deck and play like 4 or 5 combat chains wide. It was really looking to kind of put your opponent in a spot and really kind of aggro down the game. And then we subsequently saw, Lightning Briar or Briar as well, which kind of did more of the same. Orion, on the other hand, is interesting because it kind of takes a more mid-range control approach that we almost previously saw in heroes like Oldhim. If any of you are familiar with the old classic Tales of Aria heroes, where it kind of blocks and trades and plays almost more like a guardian.
Kind of funny. It's almost like you started off with one extreme on the spectrum with Runeblade, and when Briar eventually LL'd, it was the other extreme of the spectrum of incredibly defensive, and this is looking almost like it's somewhere closer to that end. What are some of the like key cards in the deck? How are we trying to win the game? Like, what are we trying to do here?
Yeah, so let's start with Florian's hero ability itself. So essentially, the entire game eventually revolves around turning on Florian's ability. So, Florian, for those of you that don't know, you require 8 or more Earth cards with this talent type, Earth, in the bottom left corner to be banished from your graveyard
Hmm.
or from your hand or wherever throughout the game. Once that happens, you get to make an additional token for each token. I guess I shouldn't say for each token, for each instance of token making that you do throughout the game. So that means if you were to make one rune chant, you would be making two. If you were to make 3 rune chants, you would be making 4. So you get substantial advantage as the game drags on once Florian ability is online. With that, keep in mind, we want to work backwards. So our goal is the late game, obviously. The question is,
Hmm.
how do we efficiently get there at that point? So if we look at the equipment suite, we see Grasp of the Arknight plus Reaping Blade. So again, I always like to work backwards when I approach a deck. What does my end game kind of goal look like? Unless I'm just an all-in aggro deck. Florian is not that. So we're going to look at our end game. What does Florian do really well in the end game? Well, these two cards in combination probably give you one of the most powerful one card combos, even though they're two separate cards. I'll explain that in a second, that we've seen since maybe the beginning of WTR. So Grasp of the
Hmm.
Arknight reads, spend 2 resources to create a rune chant. When Florian's ability is on, you will make 2 rune chants. So with a single blue, you are able to make 2 rune chants with Grasp of the Arknight once Florian is online. Attack with Reaping Blade, which is 1 resource. and then attack for 3. So functionally, at the end of the game, you are able to trade every blue in your deck for 5 points of value, which is, I can't even think of a card that's one card 5 in this game right now. So
I
just
mean,
a
it's almost like
substantial.
a cosplay Rosetta at that point, but it's more value.
Yeah, it's like Rosetta Thorn, but you don't need any of the prerequisites. Remember that Rosetta Thorn required you to play a non-attack and an attack action to get the one card 5 because you were able to grasp within Rosetta Thorn. Where Reaping Blade, once you turn Florian, is basically just that all day long.
Plus, we get that little bit of extra text of the no life gain, just as like a little tacked on bonus, which may be relevant this meta. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. Especially with it's relevant both for you and your opponent. I've hurt myself a couple times playing that life side of that arcane seeds that you see there in the left of your screen. Yeah.
And important to note with this card too, you were mentioning a minute ago of instances of token generation. This one, because it's two different instances of token generation, it's not going to be just +1. You're getting +1 twice off of this.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess we can dive into the deck at this point. I guess we can round out the equipment, but the other equipment that we see here, Tunic, the staple card that's been around since the dawn of WTR, and then Purgatory. So this card is a new addition.
This card is messed up.
Oh yeah, it's extremely good. So this is the card that you really want to play against decks that kind of go tall rather than wide. And what I mean by that is decks that present a lot of damage through one attack. So Guardians would be a good example, or Brutes. When you're blocking 6 to 7 points of damage, because what this allows you to do is give you 2 cards from your hand, which should ideally be blocking 5 to 6 points of value, plus the helmet, which should give you a total of about 7 to 8. So you're usually able to cover up a big attack quite well, and then your opponent for no value lost will discard a card and you will gain a card. So you're almost getting like a 5 point, 6 point swing for free if you're able to utilize every card in your hand for blocking, which is absolutely massive. And
Because
then
Runeblade didn't have enough messed up armor as it is, right?
yeah, because they didn't have the best equipment suite in the game by a mile. We have one thing I will know for people that are looking to play Florian, if you are playing against a deck, say Ninja, that does not go what we call tall. Ninja is a deck that goes wide, a lot of 3 attacks into another 3 attack into another 3 attack. You would then go down to the sideboard of my list and you swap that out for the Crown of Providence and put that in the deck because it does a little bit better of a job of covering up the small attacks rather than the go big attacks.
Don't really have opportunities to cover up 8 in those matchups very often.
Yeah, exactly. And funny enough, rounding up, we have the leg piece for Florian, I believe that well grounded. It started as like a limited all star, and then it's just made its way into classic constructed. Most legs just block 1. Guardian, I think, is the only class that has a block 3 legs with the cost of the Quicken token, Civic Steps. But well grounded is just amazing. It's functionally a block 2 once you decompose twice, and then it's also good enough that it acts as a kind of pseudo spell void. It covers like all the axes, and it's just really good value for an equipment. The way you want to look at the deck, in essence, is 2 parts. One, which part is good in the early game, and which part of the deck is good in the late game. So there are cards like Arcanic Seeds and Life, the split card at the top left, that are really good once Florian's ability is on. There's another card, Incarnation, Malefic Incarnation, Incantation. I can never
Incantation.
remember names. Yeah,
Malefic Incantation.
Malefic Incantation, really good in the late game because it functionally generates 6 points of value or off a single card. You will also see cards like Dread Triptych do the exact same thing in blue. So that will be a card that you're looking to play towards the end of the game. And then the rest of them kind of good most of the time everywhere else. But those 9 cards are like kind of your end game superstars and the kind of what you're kind of building to in your second cycle. So if you draw your arcane seeds early, it might be good value if you think the game's going to go long enough. You're not playing against a hyper aggro deck to over pitch for an attack. So what I mean by that is, let's say you have a blue arcanic seeds and a canaverous tilling in your hand. You, instead of pitching just the blue and coming in for 8 and playing the arcane seeds for just 3 points of value, you might, pitch the red first because you can do that in Flesh and Blood, followed by a blue pitch, put the seeds at the bottom of the deck in order to be able to play it for 5 points of value later on in the game.
Yeah, I've been finding myself doing that a lot in limited recently from all the sealed events, just like making sure I put these late game win cons back in my deck. I imagine the Enlightened Strikes and Sink Below go a long way for helping that, where you don't have to neg on value to put them back in your second cycle.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So that was going to be my next point is exactly that. If you draw one of those cards with a sink or an E strike, it's just a easy cheat code to put it at the bottom of the deck, which is exactly where you want them.
And then we kind of skipped over this, but how are we trying to turn on our hero power?
Yeah, so in the deck there are decomposed cards. So this is probably the hardest part of the deck is trying to figure out how much decomposed do we need to play, how many earth cards do we need to play, and where is that balance in between? Because there is only so many block 3 earth cards in the deck, right? We have Felling of the Crown, obviously, Channel Mount Heroic is good. But some of these block threes that we're talking about, you don't want to be blocking with them. They're worth a
Hmm.
lot more offensively than they are defensively.
That makes
So,
sense.
oftentimes we're trying to block with blue earths, and for that we really only got Autumn's Touch, right? The rest of
Hmm.
them are block 2 blues. So, it's interesting trying to strike a balance, but to get the Florian's ability, yeah, you need to decompose 3 times during the course of the game because each decompose is only worth maximum 3 earth, because you need to remove 2 earth and then a subsequent action. And the minimum times you can get that online is 3 separate decomposes. So the
So you're
decompose card,
trying to, for some of the decomposes, you're trying to do not Earth Earth action, just like a generic action. You're trying to do Earth 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 action for the decompose.
yeah, if you're like trying to turbo get it on, like if you have the luxury of doing that, then yes, you would do Earth, 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 and then Earth, Earth action, and then Florian would be online. Most of the times, it's going to take 4 decomposes likely to get online. But if you find yourself in the position, the minimum is 3.
Other than just blocking, is there any other ways that you're trying to fill your graveyard with these?
So the Majestics in this deck, Plow Under and Felling of the Crown, I believe, which is the red, are actually very interesting cards to think about because a lot of people feel like you need to get maximum value out of them and you shouldn't play them early. But they're actually very good decomposed cards in terms of value just by themselves, right? Felling of the Crown is functionally getting a card which is worth 3 points of value plus the 4 damage it's presenting. So it is still like a raging onslaught when you decompose. It is still fine to do. And then Plow Under, very similarly, while a lot less value because it's 2 cards, or sorry, it is 2 attack rather than 4. You still get 5 points of value from 2 resources, which can sometimes be possible off a tunic and a red if your hand is stuck. But
Mhm.
it's still fine and serviceable. The issue I was having originally when I was building the deck is I wanted more decomposed cards in the list, so that I could save my plow unders and felling of the crowns. But then it kind of dilutes the deck overall because you're having to play kind of suboptimal cards. We're talking about yellow tillings maybe, which honestly aren't the worst, but they're block twos and they kind of have diminishing returns. There is the gain life one, which blossoming decay, I believe its name is, which is not the greatest math either. It's basically 2 cards 6, even in red.
Yeah, Blossoming Decay.
So yeah. So, the other decomposed cards aren't great either. All in all, I chose kind of just the higher quality Earths for this version. I don't know if this is kind of where the deck is going to be. We're still in a week like -1 right now, we're recording this pre-release weekend pretty much. So, testing is going to likely change the deck a lot in the upcoming weeks. But I like to kind of start with what I know is good and then see what works, what doesn't, and kind of tune it back from there. A Rune Rager Swarm is the only card that I'm not 100% sure on as of the moment. The reason it's there is because it's decent math with Grasp of the Arknight plus your weapon, being able to make a rune chant and then having a functional 2 card 7. What I mean by that is if you have any blue Rune Rager Swarm, you're able to make a rune chant, come in for 3, and then come in with your Reaping Blade for another 3, which is 7 total. 8 if you have Florian's ability online. But it does have an awkward place in the deck where it's not cohesive with your overall game plan. It can be awkward if, especially in the early game where you just want to send 2 cards, like a blue and an earth attack, or a decompose attack to start, fueling your ability. So that is the card that I'm probably least certain about and is likely going to change.
Yeah, I could see like it potentially just being another way to try to get Earth cards into the graveyard faster or something if that's an issue for the deck.
Hmm.
Don't know if that's an issue, but like I know in limited that was an issue that I was having playing the deck of just how do I get these Earth cards in my graveyard if I don't have opportunities to block.
And Rootbound Carapace, probably saying that wrong again, is another really interesting one. So most of the decompose mechanic in this game requires you to be attacking, where Rootbound Carapace is the only card in the deck that really allows you to do it while blocking. So it kind
I
of
think
has
you
a
got the
special.
name right. I think you got the name
Right.
right.
Okay, great. So it kind of has a special place in the deck where it allows you to kind of move towards your end game goal and still kind of be defensive. So it really helps bridge together your early game where you're trying to block more into your late game where you're kind of pivoting with your arcane damage and rune chant makers.
That makes a ton of sense. Do you want to talk about the sideboard at all?
Yes. So sideboard is very specifically minded right now because we don't really know what the overall metagame looks like. So when we're early on in the season, I like to have kind of generic overarching themes, right? So we'll start with the equipment because they're easiest. We have Arcane Barrier 3 with the Dialect Carapace and the Null Rune Boots. So if you're kind of against any kind of wizard, you're bringing these into the deck. Now, the Null Rune Boots probably should be Null Rune Head the more I think about it because we already have the boots like we talked about above. So it should probably be Null Rune Hood, not boots. So excuse me on that. The tree is extremely good armor. It is kind of like, oh, sorry, the yeah,
Other
Millennium
tree,
tree.
other tree.
So this does a really good carrying husk impersonation. So it blocks for 5 at face value, and then it also gives you 2 embodiment of Earths in the late game. So really, it's blocking 5 points of value, maybe even 6 or 7, depending if you give more than one non-attack action. So any kind of aggro game, I'm kind of boarding into Barkskin over
Mhm.
Tunic. So it really depends on the matchup. If I think the game's going to be a little bit grindier, a little bit longer, then I'm playing Tunic for the extra resource value with Pummel. If I think the game is going to be a lot more aggressive slanted, then I'm playing Barkskin and Sink Belows for a little bit more defensive value. And that's an easy segue into the Pummel slot in the sideboard. So if you scroll up into the deck, you will see Sink Belows. And essentially, the way I've kind of liked to sideboard in Flesh and Blood is I like to pick a role in every matchup before the tournament starts. So for every deck in the format, I like to say, okay, I'm going to be the aggressor or I'm going to be the defensive player. And essentially, if Sink Below is in my deck, I clearly think I'm the defensive player in that matchup. If, let's say, there's a wizard player or a Kano, then obviously I'm going to be the aggressor and I'm going to be bringing in pummels in that slot.
We got targets for days for the pummels. This deck
Oh,
is, and then one of the weaknesses of the Earth that I've noticed too is having the ability to use all your cards. So they just like block pass, and you're stuck with 4 or 5 cards. Pummel's a great way to use all your cards.
Yep, exactly. So a lot of the times, especially Wizard, will try and trap you with cards, and if you want to turn them all into offensive threats, Pummel's the way to do it. And yeah, rounding out the subboard, the weakest link, kind of a throwback to Tales of Aria Heroes. A lot of no block values there. New and Enigma are still floating around, presumably, but this slot may change as the metagame evolves, right? But for now, we should still be respecting New and Enigma. Zen got quite a nerf, but maybe Zen is also viable if there's a Tiger build out there. So the weakest link is kind of just a nod to the most recent part the Mistveil heroes that were dominating the metagame just a month
Plus
ago.
the new Lightning heroes. It's probably gonna be real good against them.
Yeah, no, that's true too. Yeah, very good against Aurora. And then we have Seeds of Tomorrow, obviously doing a great. Is it sand cover in Droma? You're the Droma expert.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, so it does a great sand cover pseudo impression where if Kano is trying to Aether Flare you, it'll cover up nicely, or Wildfire you, it'll cover up nicely, so you don't get OTK'd out of nowhere.
And then not something I would have expected out of a Runeblade.
Yeah, so funny enough, it is kind of atypical to see a Runeblade playing Warmonger's Diplomacy, but because this archetype plays so much more defensive, you don't have that need to play non-attack into an attack. You can very easily kind of block out. So let me back up. Warmonger Diplomacy, classic card for Azalea or hyper aggressive Runeblade decks. Funny enough, you are a Runeblade yourself, but there are often times where you'll be able to block with 3 cards and play a Warmonger's name War, and then the following turn just play a 2 card 7 or a 2 card 8 and have a perfectly fine follow up response. So just a very potent cyber card, especially against Ranger and maybe hyper aggressive Runeblade decks that may not see Warmonger's Diplomacy in the Runeblade mirror.
Yeah, probably just for the older rune blades, I'd imagine.
Yeah, Viscerai and Vincent for sure.
If
Aurora, I had probably not Aurora the more I think about it, but yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
because
Viscera.
you got all the instants instead of the non-attacks, so
Mm,
probably hurts
yeah,
her a lot less.
yeah, definitely just Vincent and Azalea. Obviously, is the main reason you play it.
Okay, so what are some example turns going to look like for the deck? This deck is kind of operating in two different phases of the game. So like what are your like how are you trying to play your hands on the, let's call it first cycle or the pre-hero power phase of the game, and then what are you trying to play for hands after your hero power is active?
Yeah, so in the first cycle of the game, it's a lot of blocking. Block 6, attack for 8, or block 6, make a rune chant attack for 4. A lot of blocking. You want to set up your graveyard nicely so that you have the decomposes online. The rootbound carapace, the sink belows really come to shine. All your block threes. If you draw your gloom veils or your rune ranger swarms early, they're likely blocking. So you really just block, 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 block. Don't overblock. Still try and get your value. So what we like to do in Flesh and Blood is we want every card to be worth at least 3 points. We should try to value them at least 3 points. So still take your value if you where you can. If incantation, you have a free spot to play for 3, and you don't think the life's going to matter, then still get your extra point rather than blocking for 2. But in essence, you want to be filling up your graveyard, looking for value spots with Command and Conquer and Pummel if it's in your deck, and kind of just playing towards that decompose strategy we mentioned earlier.
Do you think there's ever spots where you would consider overblocking just to get the grave fill if you couldn't use all your cards anyways?
Yeah, for sure. It's actually very common, especially if you're going second and they attack you on their first turn of the game. Sometimes you'll overblock just to fill your grave up, so you have that kind of fodder for the decomposed cards. But yes, you may want to overblock early. In general, you probably still math is king in this game, so never take horrible math to get numbers back in the late game. I think that's a trap a lot of players get into. They'll throw away 3 points now with the idea of getting it back later. But if you really follow that logic all the way down, if they just took the value up front, then they may not have needed to do it, to get cute in the first place. So try not to overthink it. Just play your 2 card sevens, 2 card 8s when they, appear. 4 card 14 is still very good in classic constructed. And what I mean by that is you block with 2 cards. Ideally, they're both 3 blocks. That's 6 points of value. You attack with like a cadaver's tilling, which will bump it up to 8 with its ability. So your 4 card hand just translated into 14 points of value, 8 points offensively, 6 cards defensively. And
Mhm.
that is very, very good in this game.
And then what are we looking to play, what are example hands in the late game going to be looking like once we're online?
So funny enough, the late game hands kind of are just like the early game hands, but your arcane seeds and your incantations, basically all the cards just do a lot more. Felling of the Crown as well has like a pseudo turn on in between. So in limited, Florian only requires 4 Earths. In classic constructed, it's 8. But Felling of the Crowd 2 is kind of in that middle game where you've already decomposed once, but you get a second decompose. Then it's worth like 11 points of value off of 2 cards, which is fantastic. So you would get like 4 card 17 from it,
Mhm.
which is just nuts if you think about it. So Felling of the Crown, Plow Under, those are kind of your late game cards. And then if you go down into your blues, funny enough, you have a lot of late game value in your blues. So obviously we talked about Dread Triptych earlier. Germinate that you're fondling there is very good.
I
Uh,
got destroyed. I got destroyed by this card at the world premiere. I had to call a judge over to be like, "Does this work? Does this actually work this way?" I'm pretty sure it does. I just want to check because this is so unfair. And I was like, "Okay, I accept. I just get OTK'd, I guess."
Yeah, so one of the funny parts about Florian is that all his blues or all the blues you play just give you insane value throughout the course of the game where they're better than just blocking 3. And then I think the sleeper right now is Earth's Embrace. I don't think a lot of people fully realize how good that card is, especially if you have a second cycle of decompose. Even just kind of talking through the deck now, I can already see several changes are going to make to the deck. probably we should be boarding out Sigil of Earths and maybe tomes, and just playing more blue decomposed cards so that once our deck is kind of a little bit more blue dense, we still have Earth's Embrace into maybe 2 mana decomposed threat that keeps the Earth's Embrace around, because
Hmm.
as that card sticks around, you just get insane value in it, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, it's something we have to still kind of work on and tweak and figure out where that right balance is, and then hopefully the Arcanine as
we're,
well.
we're in week -0, -1.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
this is not going to be perfect. I will say, in theory, I like the tomes because they do two things that were like goals of the deck. You're trying to fill your grave with Earth cards, but it also lets you get rid of some of these late game cards for that are hard to pitch. Like let you can just plop one of these in Arsenal, and then when you find a tome, you can put it where you want it, fill your grave, and do some other things with your hand afterwards.
Yep, exactly. And that was the idea with them in the first place, was, put your good cards for second cycle on the bottom, put another card in the graveyard, and it's a
I
blue and it's an Earth.
I could actually, now that I'm talking about it, see Seeds just be a main board card in a lot of matchups for the same reason. Just
Yeah,
I, I'll sack the
I,
point to put a card in my graveyard, and if I was going to sack points by overpitching a card, then me playing something like this is still better value than overpitching.
it's true. When you say it like that, it becomes a lot more palatable. I am a simp for good math, so I like couldn't bring myself to playing it. But yeah, no, when you play it like that, like if we're gonna overpitch anyways, in the slower matchups, it just might be worth a consideration slot.
Ooh, um, standing order also could potentially be like maybe over the Rungar Swarm slot. Though you're filling your grave with just like rando not Earth cards, so maybe that's not worth it.
Yeah, no, I didn't even think about that. That is, yeah. I mean, you've given me a whole new direction to kind of go down. It's also good offensively. So if your opponent gives you like a turn off, quote unquote, and you're stuck with two cards in hand, one of them's a standing order and an arsenal, you get 6 points of value from it and get to sink your good card and get to keep an arsenal. It
Hmm.
may be what the deck wants. Yeah, I need to think about it more deeply, but it definitely maybe should be in over either Swarming Gloomveil or Swarm. So yeah.
What would you say are some of the like the weaknesses of the deck?
It's hard to say. I'm guessing Kano would be a tough matchup, because one thing that the value decks or the mid-range decks kind of struggle with is pushing over damage when faced with a deck that can go over the top of it. So, we talked about before where our 4 card net value is about, 13 or 14 points plus minus depending on what we're doing. But a lot of that is taken in the blocking phase. So against decks that don't give us that opportunity, like Kano, if we draw, 3 reds and a blue, we start leaking a little bit more damage than we would like. And then obviously we're not pushing as much damage as a go wide aggro deck like a ninja, so they can play their blocking game plan very efficiently until they set up, the perfect 4 card hand, and then we kind of just explode in a flurry of lava. So I would say like Wizard probably is what this deck would struggle against. It's hard to say what Verdance looks like right now, given that every time I make a Verdance deck, I think I'm looking at a good Florian deck. But I'm sure there is probably a way to build Verdance that mid-range Florian might struggle into, but that's to be seen.
That's like one of the memes that I've seen recently where there's been I think their devs or someone else was saying it was like calling her battle mage. It's like, well, isn't that just a rune blade?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've tried every time I built a Verdance deck. I kid you not. I look and I'm like, I have a sweet Florian deck laid out in front of me. So I don't know. Somebody smarter than me will figure it out, I'm sure.
I mean, that's why I got you on. I need someone smarter than me to figure out the rune blades. Any last closing? Oh, we never talked about Channel Mount Heroic. We just kind of glazed over that. Yeah, it's a 3 block.
Oh
Eh.
yeah. So, shout out
That's all.
Heroic.
That's all it's there for. Block 3.
So funny enough, it's not like an auto include in the deck. There's also a new channel mount heroic in a sense. It's the amp one.
I have no idea
The
what it's called. I've just been calling it
yeah,
Channel Mount Amp.
channel tree heroic. Yeah, I don't. It's driving me nuts. I've been never been good with card names. Anybody who knows me personally
Brother,
will
me
tell you that.
too.
Channel the
Me too.
Millennium. Yeah. So what's interesting about it in a deck like this is in decks like Briar, let's say. Or I guess I should take a step back. Chalamon Heroic at face value, if you're playing it as a fair card, is actually not a good card because it is one card three the turn you play it, and then if it only gets one more attack or two attacks total, it is two cards six, which is honestly not fantastic. In decks like Briar that would use it previously, you would cheat that by going wide, right? The more attacks you added to the combat chain, the more value you would get from it, and it would get like 12 to 18 points of value sometimes. It would just be broken math in that
That's pretty
respect.
good. That's pretty good.
Yeah, in this deck, it's a little bit harder. So ideally, you want to play it. You have three attacks to kind of get off of it. So ideally, you want to keep it around two turns if possible. So the first turn you play it, you'll keep it around because you're ideally pitching an Earth, and then maybe coming with a Swarming Gloom Veil or Rune Rager Swarm, and then following it up with maybe a Tunic into a Reaping Blade or something like that. The next turn, though, it gets a little bit more tricky, where oftentimes you'll have to sacrifice some block value so you can pitch an Earth to the Grasp, let's say, and then come in with a two card eight. So you're kind of giving up a little bit of value to get a little bit of value later on.
Hmm.
Because then you're netting, so the Grasp functionally is worth 1 point, and then the Heroic on the next attack will be worth 3 points. So your block value would have been worth three already, right? Or two if it's a block two. So you're only actually getting like 1 to 2 points with Channelmon Heroic in this deck. So it's like actually like a very fair Channelmon Heroic. It's actually just like two card eight if you think about it. If you like really break it down, it's maybe a little bit too complicated for a deck tech video. But trust me when I say that Channelmon Heroic in this deck is probably the most fair Channelmon Heroic you'll ever see, and the math usually works out to be about 8 points of value for Channelmon Heroic.
I mean, if nothing else, it's like 3 block Earth card that is a punish card if your opponent just tries leaving you stranded with cards.
Yeah,
If they just block out and say go next, you're like, whatever, Channel Matt Heroic. I wanted to block with this, but if you insist, I'll punch you in the mouth. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
you chose this path. I guess we're pummeling you.
Yeah, with Felling of the Crown and Plow Under 2, there are a lot of turns where you're kind of just get your opponent's hand because they know they're going to take a bunch of damage. So they're kind of just throwing what they have, setting up an arsenal and passing. And like you said, yeah, Channelmon Heroic does a really good job at bridging those full tempo turns that you probably wouldn't get otherwise.
All right, do you want to talk about the Funny Briar deck at all?
Sure, sure.
I
So
saw this and I literally had PTSD flashbacks of First Nationals.
yeah, so I mean, so for those of you that played or didn't play back in Tales of Aria, I kind of mentioned at the start of the video, this is kind of what the deck looked like. There was no blues. All of the cards cost zero, and you functionally just went wide and hit them as hard as you could, minimal blocking, and tried to end the game as soon as possible. It is very unilateral, one-sided gameplay. The game has evolved to the point where that's no longer optimal, but I thought I would troll Pheano a little bit. And when he asked for deck list, Snap send him this functionally Lightning Briar 2.0 deck list. I
Wait,
do
wait,
not
wait.
think,
Where's the Sting of Sorceries? We need those in.
yeah, there's no ball lightning anymore. So
What are you
it's
talking
rough.
about? We ball lightning
Yeah,
at home.
yeah, at home is the key part of that phrase. Yeah.
So let's talk about the real one.
Okay, so Aurora is kind of this version or this set's take on an aggro hero. Her ability reads, two resources create an embodiment of lightning token, only if you played a lightning card this turn, and that's about it. And you can play lightning cards. In general, I've never really been a super fan of these kind of effects. We see this effect kind of, it's a recurring theme in Flesh and Blood where you pay a little bit of resources up front to get an effect later down the line. Tectonic plating was the classic first time we saw that effect in WTR. Suspend a resource now, get a resource later. The reason why I've never been a super fan of it is because you usually need to alternate turns for it to be good. So if you're constantly just pitching two resources and constantly refreshing your embodiment token every turn, you never really get the value off of it. You're basically paying two resources for a blink effect, which is just kind of like meh. It's okay, but it's not like you're not excited about it. So in order to get full value off of it, you need to kind of take an off turn where you either trick your opponent to over blocking cards that they wouldn't have, or or so you yeah, so you trick them into overblocking, and then you make an embodiment of lightning, arsenal a card, and then try and come in with a big 5 card hand. And then the next turn again, try and come in with a smaller 2 to 3 card hand, make an embodiment of lightning, and so forth. So that's kind of the play pattern you're looking for. Then we can talk about it more with the equipment and card selection.
So before we jump into that, what are we trying to do with the deck? Are we just like Ooga Booga aggro deck? Is there something deeper going on here?
So functionally smack him in the face for as much as possible. There are a couple of really cute combos with the deck, which we'll talk about in a second. But yes, at heart, this is a aggro deck that is just trying to go one direction, and most of the cards block for 2 or 0. So not a lot of blocking going on.
Where do you want to start on talking about cards here? You said there's some cute combos, some different points to talk about here.
Yeah, so let's talk about the equipment first of all, and then we'll try and jump into it. So,
Hey, our
we
old friend's
see
back.
yeah, Grasp of the Arcanite, very classic Runeblade equipment we've seen since the inception of Runeblade. Just fantastic value. Allows you to sink any excess resources into it. 3 points of life, not much to say there. Crown of Providence, same thing. Just good value card. Aether Ironweave, I think, is the first interesting take on this in this deck. Um,
Yeah, I was wondering on that one.
so because your blue count is very light in this deck, and we'll jump into that in a second, it often gives you an out to certain hands where you might want to be a little bit more resource intensive. It kind of basically it's a nod to games are messy. In theory, we can always make a deck and kind of go, yeah, like this deck will work like this, and we'll do this, this, and this every turn. But in reality, you're going to draw all red hands. You're going to draw no blues, and maybe or you're going to need those extra couple resources. So it just kind of bridges that gap between theory and reality. The more you play with Aurora, you'll see those hands come up, and Aether Ironweave will get you out of sticky situations, but it will also facilitate some of your more broken turns as well. If
Hmm.
you needed a blue that turn and you just didn't have one, so it kind of is kind of like the unappreciated effect because it's not flashy, but when you need it, it like really saves your game.
Yeah, I can also see that too of like if you drew the all red hand, it might also be the all red hand and you don't have the action points to play everything. So now it's the difference maker of you being able to continue playing all these cards where you might have just thrown 2 cards and passed basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so Lightning Greaves is the really cute one. So it has a very interesting, unique effect, and it is not very beginner friendly. So it says destroy this, and it is battle worn. So make sure you get your 1 block value before you destroy it. Instant cards you play this turn can get go again. It also has AB1, so it kind of does it all. In Flesh and Blood, go again is a shortcut phrase to mean when this card resolves, gain an action point. And because instants don't use your original action point, you will functionally get 2 action points. So, for example, if I have 1 action point, it's the start of my turn. I use Lightning Greaves' ability. It's an instant, so it doesn't use any action points. I then play a card like Blink, which is just gain an action point. So I then have played Blink, which gives me an action point. Blink itself has Go again, so it gets another action point, and I have my original action point. So you have 3 action points. You'll probably start to see why they started banning books when they did, because with Total Findell, that combination would probably be absolutely absurd.
Yeah, that would have been
Um,
pretty messed up.
so one of my favorite ways to use it is with the card Gone in a Flash.
This card
Yeah.
looks messed up. I was like, I
So
don't see the vision with this yet, but I'm sure this is nasty.
yeah, so with your boots in any instant, such as blink or electrostatic discharge, is that
Somersault?
no
Somersault?
the
The other
somersault
one?
too. Somersault's good
Uh,
too, but discharge would be the other one, and blink. I mean, somersault is good as well. You play Gone in a Flash. You let the card hit, you then crack your boots. This is still before the go again is there. You play electrostatic discharge. It will gain your action point back from your boots. This is very confusing now that I'm talking through it. You gain your action point from lightning greaves because electrostatic discharge has go again now. So now
mhm.
you have an additional action point to play Gone in a Flash. So you've just played functionally 11 damage off of 2 cards with some floating resources. So with Starfall, assuming you get an attack in there, it would be like a 3 card 13 or 14, depending on what else you have going on. So
Because we still need the pitch card to cover this.
to activate that, yeah. If you want to do it with an Aether Iron Weave, it's 2 card 13, I believe, or 11. Yeah, 2 card 13. So
Okay, so we play Gone on a Flash, we let damage
yeah,
happen, we activate our Lightning Greaves, we then
yeah.
play an instant. It's going to gain
Mhm.
us an action point from the go again that it got from Lightning Greaves, and then that's going to put the Gone on a Flash back in our hand,
Into your hand, and you can play it
and then we
again
get to play it again.
for 7, yeah, because the electrostatic discharge. So 2 card 11 with the lightning greaves with the blue floating. So 3 card and a starfall. So 3 card 13.
That's
Really good
really
match.
good. And
Yeah,
we could in theory do this again, right? If we had another instant,
yeah. If you had another instant, you could just keep doing it. So
it's a lot of damage.
yep, that is a lot of damage. The other key part of the deck. So if you scroll down, is the Arc Lightning, which is the Aurora specialization. Every card you use that has go again functionally deals 1 arcane damage, including itself. So that means all your equipment as well also will deal 1 arcane damage. And remember,
Oh, I
we
didn't
talked about
consider the
the chess
equipment.
piece. So the chess piece also starts giving damage. So one of the cooler things you could do is start your turn with it, play an attack, then pop your chess piece, make a rune chant, attack with Starfall. So like all of these things that you're doing are all 1 damage for functionally free, all because of Arc Lightning. So that is another really cool combination with your equipment.
How much
And if you
damage do
get
you think you're usually getting out of this when you play it?
well in your equipment alone, like if let's say you went chess piece into grasp into Starfall, like that there is already 3 points of value plus the rune chant is 4, and then, like you haven't even played a card, right? So
And then this itself does one also, right?
yeah, so you're getting like 5 points just from that, and you haven't even played a card yet. So it adds up very quickly. Yeah.
So this seems like
So
it might be one of the power cards of the deck.
yeah, for sure. This is one of those cards that you wait patiently in your arsenal until you have an optimal hand and you kind of just push massive damage through.
Any other noteworthy cards like that that are like your game plans are kind of revolving around these cards?
So the card right next to it, Channel Lightning Valley. Go ahead and take a
That's a
peep
good
at that.
one. It's a 0 cost lightning instant aura. The first time you would deal damage to an opposing hero each turn, draw a card, and then it has the channel thing where you have to bottom the a lightning card equal to the number of counters on it.
Yep.
That's pretty good.
So it's very good. And I love it specifically with a combination of the D react, which you will see above Sigil of Suffering. So note 2 things special about Channel Lightning Valley. 1, it's an instant, so you can play it on your opponent's turn. And then 2, it triggers on each turn.
Hmm.
So that means that you can flash it in at instant speed on your opponent's turn, block with Sigil of Suffering, and then if your opponent doesn't have a free floating resource, they either have to discard an extra card in order to stop the arcane, or you draw a card plus block. So you're getting like 7 points of value from it, which is fantastic.
And you got the thing that Icelander used to be able to do of because you're playing the channel on their round, you kind of like cheat an extra turn of the flow counters because it doesn't care that it was in play during their turn. It only cares about your turn for the flow counters.
Yeah, exactly. So you basically get a free card from Sigil for no additional cost in the sense of Channel Lightning cost ability or cost
Hmm.
effect.
And then I imagine it's pretty easy to make sure you get the a couple extra cards off of this over the course of the game because you have so many breakpoints here, so many ways to kind of cheese damage with things like arc lightning and lightning press. Where it's like, how are they stopping all of this? Give you all the armor that turn, maybe.
Exactly. So, it usually will last at least 2 turns and it will get about 2 cards of value. So, in math numbers and numbers, it is like a 1 card 6. It is a 0 for 6 if you break it down. 0 for 9 if
Mhm.
you combine it with a successful Sigil of Suffering, depending on where you want to place that value. So, yeah, just a fantastic card on rate. The next one I want to talk about is Electromagnetic Somersaults, and I think it's one of the more interesting ones, and especially during the world premiere pre-release season, it's the one I see people kind of misevaluate the most. So I'm going to try my best to kind of break it down on and how you should think about it. But yeah, so this card says choose up to 2 actions, attack actions, with cost 0 or more on the active chain link. So link means what's currently happening or being attacked with right now, not what has attacked on a previous link, what will attack, what's happening right now. So you choose 2 attacks on the link. It could be yours or your opponent's, but you ideally should never really be choosing your opponent's. So usually your own. and then you return them to your hand at the end of the combat chain link resolution, meaning that you don't get to push damage through, or you don't get to take extra damage if you target your own stuff. So your cards will still block. So this card you should be functionally looking at as a modal card, where because a lot of your cards just block for 2 in your deck. Some, like Arcanic Shockwave, do block for 3, but and Gone with a Flash block for 3. So let's say you had a 3 block and a 2 block in your hand with Electromagnetic Somersault. You were able to block 5 points of value with the 3 and the 2. Then play Electromagnetic Somersault, target them both, return them both to your hand, and you functionally blocked 5 with just the Electromagnetic Somersault. So the one half of Electromagnetic Somersault should be viewed as either a block 4 to 6, right? Because if you have 2 blocks, it will block 4. If you have 3 blocks, it will block 6. If you have a 3 block and a 2 block, it will block 5. So that is one half of the effect, is it will block somewhere between 4 to 6 points of value, which even the floor is above rate. We think of Sink Below, it's already above rate. The other half of this effect is you can use it offensively. So let's say I attacked with a Fry, right? Fry is 0 cost, 3 attack with Go Again. I can then play it and return the Fry to my hand and then replay it. So it is functionally like a clone effect, where it can clone any attack on the combat chain as long as you have the action points to do so. One of the cool things you can do with Blink, let's say, is you can go like Gone in a Flash, combat chain resolution, Blink, with your boots, like I said, to get 3 action points. Play Gone in a Flash again, play an Electromagnetic Somersault, return it to hand, play it again, and so forth. Electrostatic Discharge, you can do it with. I mean, you can do with Gone in a Flash, you can do it with any instant, but maybe that was a bad example. But Electromagnetic Somersault can turn any attack into an additional one. Entwine Lightning, Flittering Charge.
So a lot of the times it's a 0 for 4 on offense, or it's 4 to 6 block on defense.
Thank you for succinctly summarizing what I'm trying to say. Yes. It's
With
additionally
upside sometimes on offense with synergies.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been lovingly calling this card Pot of Greed just because of the being able to return 2 on defense. It's not as good as the Pot of Greeds that we had, but still, it's funny that them banning all of our Pot of Greeds and then just being like, here's a new one, basically.
Yeah, it is a very powerful card.
Watching people use that during the world premiere, I was just like, oh man, this is so good. Just people returning like a Heaven's Claw and something else to their hand after blocking. It was just so much value out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm. The rest of the deck, pretty simple. Like your classical aggro deck, they're functionally just go wide lightning cards. They're not rewriting the textbook in any way. There are a lot of 0 for 4s with Go Again. There are a lot of 0 for 3s with Go Again. There's Ravenous Rabble, which makes an appearance again, one of my favorite cards. A lot of the times it will be a head jab, but something like close to 55% of the time it will be worth 4 points of value, which is more than enough reason to play the card in the deck. And then Snatch, just you don't have a ton of chain enders in this deck. Your weapon has natural Go Again, so it's nice to have a card that threatens a break point that you can get a 1 card 7 out of. So all the kind of previous All Stars we see are back in the deck.
I see you're not having to scrape the bottom of the barrel though with this deck and have to also play yellow Rabbles.
Yeah, we've learned and we've evolved.
So what are some example turn cycles going to look like for this deck? Like, what's your average 4 or average 5 card hand kind of looking like?
Yeah, so with a 4 card hand, especially early on in the game, you may want to start off slowly by making an embodiment of lightning. So let's say we have a blue lightning surge in hand, an entwine lightning, and I don't know, a lightning press, let's say, plus a snatch or a Gone in the Flash or something, some other card that we intend to arsenal. You then go Entwine Lightning, fuse with the blue Lightning Surge, get 0 for 4 with Go Again. You then attack with your weapon, Starfall, which is 1 resource for 2 attack Go Again. And then you end with another red card, which is 0 for 4, probably not with Go Again, Flittering Charge, Snatch, Gone in a Flash, Arcanic Shockwave, whatever. So you will functionally be doing 3 cards for 10 points of value, otherwise known as Red Thunderquake or Red Glacial Footsteps, that Guardian players work so hard to do. So 3 card 10. And then you will have 2 resources left over to make a Embodiment of Lightning with Aurora's ability. Embodiment of Lightning is Next time you play an attack, you sacrifice it, and your next attack gets go again. So you've done 10 damage with 3 cards, and then you arsenal your final card, and you are able to play a 5 card hand with a go again effect to start your turn next turn.
And then next turn, are we looking to do the same thing? Maybe are we trying to go like on turn, off turn with the embodiments?
Yeah. So the next turn, when you have a 5 card hand, you obviously want to use every resource you can into producing a high damage output. So you would just functionally play your 5 card hand. If you have the resources left over, yeah, it's always great to recycle the embodiment of lightning token. But oftentimes you'll probably be using everything you have. Sometimes you may not even draw blue and then just hit them for hopefully 5 times 4, which is 20 points of value. Just keep doing that until you win. The next turn, you may have a 4 card hand and then revert back to the Thunderquake math that I subsequently said.
And then we were talking about this early. It might be too early for this to be developed, but we were talking about that earlier with Briar. We had the Sting Ball package. Is there any sort of like anti-fatigue concept of an idea in this deck, or are we not that far yet?
We're not that far yet. One big thing is that, like Tales of Aria had ice, we don't have ice right now in the metagame. So on rate, you can probably fatigue by damage. It's a term I love. But when you're constantly throwing 4 points of value at your opponent, unless they have like some crazy remembrance package, they will oftentimes fatigue before you will. You also have a recurable weapon. So you will be able to kind of trade damage that way
Hmm.
offensively through good math. Gone in a flash, 1 card for 8 points of value. So you're getting a lot of damage offensively, and if your opponent's constantly blocking, they should hopefully fatigue first. You also have cards like Lightning Press that help you push through damage and leak damage, so your opponents have a hard time, blocking efficiently. And there's also cards like Arc Lightning, which, like we talked about before, a lot of damage on one turn where you kind of just overwhelm your opponent's defenses, especially if they're like a hyper aggro or sorry, hyper defensive fatigue plan.
Just real briefly, for anyone that might not understand what that means, what is fatiguing by damage?
So, fatiguing by damage is a term that we kind of jokingly came up with in testing, where this is back in the days of Oldhim, where there were 2 different types of deck. One that would always try and fatigue through defensive measures, and then one that would reach a fatigue endgame by constantly attacking and forcing your opponents to block. So, fatigue by damage just means you've attacked your opponent so much, you've put them on the back foot for so long that they've just run out of cards in deck. Because in Flesh and Blood, blocking is always going to be inherently less efficient than attacking, right? Most cards usually defend for less value than what they attack for, combined with the fact that, 1 card lost can sometimes produce multiple points of value. Gone in a Flash being 8 points of value in 1 card, or no card in the game until recently could really block for 8 points by itself.
Plus, also when you're attacking, you're inherently putting cards back in your deck where blocking you're not usually. Yeah, that was all when I was playing against fatigue decks in the past. That was always the more scary variant of the one that's like actually playing the game with me and trying to deck me out by just like chaining disruption or something like that into me. Like
Hmm.
back during the Lexi meta, just the
Yep.
Oldhim was just like, nope, all gas, no brakes, punch you in the mouth every turn.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts on this deck before we move on, and any weaknesses that you've noticed or anything else you want to talk about?
One weakness of the deck is obviously it doesn't block well. You'll see almost every card block for 2 or 0, with the exception of the D React, which only blocks 3 sometimes. Um, so I do suspect that it's weak against disruption. It's hard to say. Funny enough, I think it's good into new because it doesn't have one specific piece. New was good into Zen because Zen was, it required kind of a combination of cards to get, a good effect or good damage turn. Where this deck, every card is itself just good value. So news disruption, if it makes it discard a card or two, like 2 card 8 is still fine math. 1 card 4
Hmm.
is good math. So it's kind of hard to disrupt it in that way. But it is more susceptible to on hits like Command and Conquer, obviously. My feeling is that the Earth Heroes will do well into it, but we'll see.
Oh, we completely skipped that. The sideboard.
Yeah, so the sideboard, like the other one, I like to target, certain matchups. So Warmonger's Diplomacy, we talked about that before. Basically just for Ranger, because you're not playing a ton of non-attack actions. I believe it's just your specialization. So don't draw Warmongers with your specialization, and you should be fine.
And speaking
Um,
of disruptive decks, right, Ranger.
Yeah, so you really just want Warmongers versus Azalea. That's what it's there for. Sink Below. You want it for your Guardian matchups. Anything with like big crush effects. Just a little bit more padding so that you don't get hit with Spinal Crush or a Weakest Link or whatever, and you're trying to block a little bit more.
Does the
Carapace,
dyadic come in with the sinks?
I think so. So that's going to be my idea versus Guardian, because you still want the game to hopefully end in 4 turns. Obviously, if they're blocking more, they're not hitting you with disruptions. So if the game is going to go longer, then because they're forcing it to, you're okay with that. But if they're going to try and trade erase you with crush effects, then you want Sync and Didac. That's the idea as it currently stands. And then Command and Conquer to round out the Ranger package. Ranger has a lot of disruptions. You want to be playing 2 card hands a little bit more efficiently, try and throw them off a bit. Burn Up and Shock is Boom Grenade, Ping 1 Boom Grenade, I like to call it. But
I'm surprised to not see this in the main board.
yeah, it's not great everywhere, right? One of the great things about Boom Grenade is in Dash IO, you can play it off the top of the deck in Dash or Dash EO, Dash IO. Yeah. New
Dio.
Dash, you can play it off the top of the deck, and you get roughly like 2 turns of full value from it. In the original Dash, you can kind of just play it and then have a full card, 5 card hand next turn. So there was that kind of suspend effect on Boom Grenades where you don't get that with Burn Up and Shock. So it really comes in only against decks that don't block well. The Mirror Match comes to mind. Ninjas come to mind. Any deck that multiple 4 breakpoints probably can't cover well with armor and block theories or D-reacts, then you want Burn Up and Shock it. But if you're going to play this deck into like Guardian, they would just easily block it out, and you've thrown a card in the garbage for 0 points of value.
Oh, you got that 1 point.
They're going to Arcane Barrier it. I'm just kidding. I don't know. Yeah, maybe you get that.
And then the Enlightened Strikes is just to smooth out the deck in some way.
It's so this is kind of just an entire package. So against Guardian Disruption, I bring in CNCs, E strikes, sync belows. Essentially, like I'm a very big believer in just understanding that bad stuff will happen, and when it does, like what is my game going to look like? So E strike's really good at putting together broken hands because it gives you something good to do with multiple reds or disjoining hands. Command and Conquer usually asks for opponents to block with cards, making their offensive turn a little bit less functional. So
which then
these
gives you
cards,
space to play the game.
exactly. Yep. So these 3 cards that you see, E-Strike, CMC, and Sync Below, are for your messier matchups that tend to have more on hits. Warmonger's Diplomacy is for your Azalea matchup, and then Burn Up is for your aggro mirrors.
And is this just Kano?
Yeah. The best anti-Kano card.
Are we actually trying to use the ability on this, or is that just like flavor text? Maybe if we have flooded blues.
Hey man, if free damage is free damage, if you can get it to work, you get it to work.
Does it have synergy with anything in the deck?
Yeah, extra blues.
Any closing thoughts on the deck?
Nope, I think I've hit on kind of all the main points. Just like the Earth Hero, we're still in very early testing phases, so stuff may change going forward.
I think this is a solid starting point. 0-4, go again. Like I can't really go wrong. It's a tried and true model. You've shown that's a pretty good a base for a deck.
Yeah, it's hard to it might be my week 1 deck, when you don't really know when opponents don't really know what they're doing, a good plan is kind of just hit them in the face very fast and very hard, and this deck certainly does that very well.
Yeah, I was going to be working on something soon, talking about that for like a what type of things you should be bringing to ProQuest, and that was like one of the points I was going to make during it of like, hey, just ask questions, and can you beat 0-4 go again 5 times in a turn is a great question to ask your opponent. It's rather than trying to answer their questions, just be like, hey, deal with this. You tell me if you have a plan. I don't have a plan for what you're doing yet because it's week 1. So where do you see these heroes place in the meta and their overall strength in the early meta right now?
I think Lightning is going to be a little bit better than it will in 6 to 8 weeks by the time Osaka rolls around, because decks are still being fine tuned. We talked about before where Verdance, the wizard, doesn't even have an identity. I don't even know how I would build a Cilio. Florian, we're still kind of working it out. Decks that have a lot more mid-range plan to it, they're a little bit more fluid, and they kind of are reactive and proactive, and you got to kind of pick your spots. It's a little bit harder to do that in early metagames. So I think Aurora definitely really good out of the gates. Will probably fall off as people kind of exploit its weakness, understand what the deck does a little bit better. And as the metagame evolves, I expect to see Florian kind of pick up steam and kind of be what you want to be doing if you're in that Runeblade Earth category.
And then, how do you feel like these heroes compare to the previous iterations of Runeblade?
I've been testing Living Legend because of the World Cup that will be happening in Osaka. I am playing that for Canada. And I will
Oh,
say that Briar is kind of nuts. So I will say the older Runeblades, specifically Briar, is still kind of insane, especially with the new cards. So this, I think, is a lot more interactive and nuanced gameplay compared to some of the older heroes, which I think is a good thing.
I'd agree with that. You mentioned a second ago of you don't know where the two wizards are going to be. If anyone else is curious about where that's going to be, I'm actually going to be doing a video just like this with Majin Bay in a few days, where he's going to be going over the two new wizards, and hopefully he's got the sauce to tell us how those work. But until then, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Tariq Patel 10. I'm working like a madman, so I've kind of taken a step back from the content game, other than to join really cool people like yourself on these awesome shows. But yeah, if you want to hear my thoughts or just read my opinions or watch me joke, Tariq Patel 10 on Twitter or at Twitter.
Deck lists are going to be in the description below, along with all of his socials, so you can find him. Until then, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys.